nice reading something a bit more normy every now and then. You know what I mean? It's like, even if the analysis isn't, I don't know, perfect. But like, who cares? But like,
it's fun to work out, how much of this is topical or relevant to us, or how much is not, and where could we layer in some other critiques to,
Yeah. Well, should we get takes first? I mean, the election results will be like a week old by now, and also there might be a new prime minister.
I had a little chat before we had a little look before we started recording. So, has Keir Starmer resigned yet?
Yeah, not yet.
I think he's never going to go. I think like,
I don't know why he would. I mean, so we're recording this on the 13th. It's a Wednesday. Supposedly there might be a leadership contest tomorrow, which would be very funny. Because the challenger would be Wes Streeting, which, like, to your point, is like replacing vanilla ice cream with vanilla ice cream. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. Maybe you have more. I would imagine you have more of an understanding of this kind of from living in England. But like, what's the difference between these two guys?
I feel like the universal take on Wes Streeting seems to be that it will be the end of the Labour Party. That will be it. Over.
What if he becomes the prime minister?
Over. Wes Streeting's been knocking around for a little while because I think at least Keir Starmer is not. I mean, it's not a proper job exactly, but he was a barrister. He was part of the elite. Sort of establishment in the UK, but at least it was something other than being a politician. Where Streeting was just like, he probably did PPE. I don't know that for sure, but he probably did PPE, and it was probably probably not at Oxbridge, but and then he went on to be head of the students, the UCU, which not the UCU, the NUS, which is the National Students' Union. It's not a real trades union per se, but it's like the national body that ostensibly represents the interests of students. I think he was head of the student union, the NUS, when I was a student in the late 2000 aughts sometime, and was always sinister and backstabbing and slimy and I don't know, lacking in any seeming substance or conviction other than being self-serving, and he's fallen in with a similar cadre of people, I think, i.e. all of the ghouls of the Blairite project from
and been like, that's who I want to be.
He's also so completely hand in hand with Peter Mandelson. It's like there's somebody who, it's impossible to imagine having a political career in the wake of all the revolutions around Mandelson, but he's going to go for it anyway.
Well, if there was any more proof that we needed that doesn't actually really matter to the ruling, that was all just people trying to maneuver around Starmer, right? I suppose to a certain extent, at least within the Labour Party, right?
But it might just speak to the total, detachment of what is seemingly relevant and important. And
I mean, this is just another nail in the coffin for my old thesis, which is anybody that ever gets involved in student government, you need to avoid like the plague, because those are all very people of a certain type, I'll say. I have found myself kind of interested to know what it would accomplish replacing Starmer with Wes Streeting in terms of the actual material forces that would be supporting Streeting over Starmer. Because if that's who they're going to try and replace you with, Starmer's right to just be well, no. I'm not just why would I go anywhere? Can you really get enough votes for people to support him over me? Surely you should have some different agenda. And presumably there's probably loads of back channeling going on right now with people trying to promise different things to different MPs and all of that. But from an outsider's point of view, somebody who is, not really involved in British politics at all, I have a hard time seeing what it would accomplish at all. It would just be window dressing, presumably, because it's for the voters, no one's going to be they got my guy in there. They got Wes Streeting in there. You know what I mean? What would that materially change for the voters? Presumably it's changing something for their real base. Maybe. I guess that's all being hashed out now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I mean, it feels like the appropriate fix if you think that Keir Starmer's only failing is that he did poor communication, or like he just did bad management, or made a few bad mistakes, and just failed generally at being a good politician, and don't recognize that what he offered was absolutely nothing of substance that actually was, as you say, like materially beneficial to anybody. You know, like if your critique is not as it should be, if your critique is not that he actually just failed because he is completely insubstantive and had nothing positive to offer people, and people have eventually seen through it, then obviously West Streeting is not the appropriate replacement. But if you think simply the failing is bad politics, then you it's just a technocrat. You get a new technocrat in, because all you need to do is, I don't know, be from the correct elite background and manage the system appropriately. But
it is funny that they're just both so similar in terms of like their outward, not like personas. Like I feel like West Streeting is a bit more of an asshole, but like like I don't know. I don't know. It's just odd. Like the funniest possible outcome would this would also maybe be the most detrimental outcome for everybody living in the UK. But like if there just wound up being a kind of, I forget exactly what year it was, but when there was just that kind of like round robin carousel of conservative prime ministers where they just couldn't get anyone to do anything and nobody could agree on anybody. If that just happens to the Labour Party, it would be like, okay, so these two parties are now just like DOA, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, it does seem to point to a more systemic problem than one localized simply internally to the Conservative Party, right? We just can't, prime ministers can't seemingly survive present conditions in the UK,
yeah, well, absolutely.
Which speaks the bigger problem,
yeah, exactly. And we're definitely, that's definitely going to be the bulk of, I feel like, this episode is getting into what those bigger problems actually are and why nobody seems like they're going to be able to do anything about it. But it is interesting. It's just like, on a certain level, like the ruling classes, they all believe that their guy can do it still, and it's crazy. And it seems like the kind of like, global far right, represented obviously best by like Trump, is they just kind of figured it out because they're like, well, who gives a fuck who it is? If they just promise us enough corruption and graft, and they'll sell off enough stuff, and they'll promote Kalshi, it's like, and crypto and other scams, it's like, it really doesn't matter. It's, and even better if it's somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, because frequently those people are just like actors and, media people or whatever. But yeah, like if you're a technocrat that actually believes in some sort of like Fabian or even like centrist politics, like, yeah, you're just going to be stuck in this loop of, but maybe Hillary should run next time, right? Or maybe Kamala should run next time. Or is Biden still alive? Maybe he can still do it, right? It's like, yeah,
I feel like the slightly naive first thought that I had when I'm trying to rationalize these people and what they're thinking is that they simply believe that the system works and think that all the system needs is good governance, and maybe they can be the person that can represent the good governance necessary to like steer the ship. But I think you're actually pointing to the actual crux of it, which is, they're just self-serving and they know what elite they're from or what elite they serve, and they know what financial or industrial interests they represent, and just go through the process of, I don't know, transferring what remaining wealth the UK has to Palantir or whoever else they're going to get into.
You're great.
Whoever else they're going to get into run these.
Run
the British state on our behalf. As they continue
the great, or at least the surveillance aspects of it. Did your party bother running any people in local elections, council elections?
I don't think so. I think their strategy was to endorse independent candidates who were running.
Cool.
I think they probably. I mean, there's probably a pragmatic sense of them not being ready to do it, and also sort of like slightly sinister sense of they just don't. This maybe it's pragmatism as well, but like a slightly more sinister version of it, where you say, well, they just didn't actually have the institutional apparatuses to ensure that the candidates that went forward as your party candidates were either sufficiently good or sufficiently in hoc to the whatever the agenda
to whatever the line is.
Whatever the line is, you know, they don't have the they don't have a party. They don't have the ability to whip or discipline anybody, which I think your party under Jeremy Corbyn and his coterie of supporters would like your party to be. I think that the critique of the left would have been that you should have just created all of the branches and let the branches pick people, and we could have run people. But
not there yet.
I believe did not run any candidates in the recent local elections. No.
Well, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean we haven't we talked about the greatest irony, really perhaps relevant to this piece to some extent, is that today was the King's speech, which is the like state opening of Parliament, where the King speaks to the House of Lords on behalf of his government and sets out the governing agenda for the next year or the next 2 years, as if anybody thinks this government's going to last like 2 weeks, let alone 2 years.
He's just looking around like, man, come on, do I really? Come on, I gotta get back. I gotta get back to my like estate. What am I doing here? But did he say anything of note?
No. I had a little skim through. You know, there's some things. You know, they're gonna. You know, it's mostly just tinkering around the edges, managing this, that, and the other. They're going to nationalize the steel industry, which is being touted as Keir Starmer's great new, like, innovative, bold new direction for the country and for the party. Except that they're only nationalizing British Steel because it's going to go bankrupt otherwise. So it's not nobody wants to buy it, and that's why they're nationalizing it. It isn't any great. Keir Starmer hasn't come to his socialist senses and decided to nationalize all the commanding heights of British industry, largely because Britain doesn't have any commanding heights.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's because there's not really a lot of industry there. That he's going to nationalize the data centers that haven't actually been built. That never wound up getting built.
Nationalize the financiers and the consultants.
I mean, that I could get behind. Starmer promised that. You have my full support. Go just nationalize the city of London.
You mean liquidate
everything inside? Liquidate. Yeah, exactly. No, nationalize it, Keir. No. All right. Well, this could be our first episode where the title of it is just clickbait.
Yeah,
because we did a while ago.
We
just picked it because it was clickbait. A while ago, this article, which is called "Britain is Dead," was being shared around a lot, along with an article that we read a while ago called the Long, Slow Death of Global Development, I think is what it was called. And it was kind of shared in tandem with that to kind of explain, to explain Britain's decline. And while this isn't necessarily like a Marxist analysis, I would say like capital M Marxist analysis of Britain's decline, it raises actually some really interesting questions that we haven't actually really come across a lot on the show by virtue of it not being fully Marxist, I would say. Questions about like decadence maybe, and like the ruling elite and what they're up to in a current moment of decline. And I think I just kind of wanted to read it for all of those reasons, but also because I think it's a really interesting case study in what a nation like the United Kingdom kind of where it finds itself in this period of global decline, where, America is relatively easy to kind of understand. And we'll get to all of that, like what it's up to, just like this super military power that's just doubling down on like carbon intensive industries and destroying the world and ripping apart the welfare state and murdering poor people and keeping the ghettos, as policed as ever while attempting to project like a declining American imperial might. China's just kind of trying to sell shit. Europe is in a really interesting place by virtue of it being made up of all of these different individual nations that are kind of attempting to come together to form some sort of sovereignty with the EU, such as it exists, and all of the internal dynamics there. But the UK is a really interesting, it's a really interesting case study, I would say, in terms of what its place is in this global decline in hopefully something like the terminal phase of capitalism. But, for better or for worse, I guess. But yeah, this author makes some really astute observations, I would say, about the nature of the governing apparatuses of the UK, and then maybe also some stuff that we might kind of critique a little bit. maybe, but for the most part, it was just a really interesting analysis of where the UK finds itself. We should say this was written a few years ago as well, but yeah, what'd you take from it?
Yeah, I found myself wrestling with this question of because this is not like a out and out Marxist analysis, how right or wrong can its conclusions be taken to be by us? And I think on reflection now, I kind of feel like maybe it isn't actually getting at the root cause of some of these problems, and therefore perhaps doesn't have a complete sense of, you know, or doesn't have the fullest explanation of what the problem is, or what the ultimate outcome may be, or what the possibilities, the future of Britain are. But that said, I also feel like it is highlighting some really important true things about the nature of the British state and the sort of the types of elites that the British system produces. It is borrowing, I think, quite heavily from a sort of historical materialist analysis of the nature of British capitalism to some extent, although it's not referenced really fervently. I think it's there, this idea that like the nature of the way capitalism developed in Britain, the sort of like early genesis of it, having a continued impact all the way through to today, and also making this really interesting assertion that the decline, the causes of the decline, were evident or can be traced all the way back to sort of earliest days of the British state and the British state under the capitalist system, I guess.
Yeah. And it's interesting that because he kept being like, yeah, and this was evident in the 1700s. And it's like, was it? It's like, that's crazy. But I mean, if you take the kind of just like core, because to not bury the lead too much, like the main argument here is it's very elite focused and about why the like technocrats and the elites in the UK are not really interested in coming to terms with the fact that Britain is in and has been in a decline phase for quite some time. But yeah, I mean, like, I guess if you take the argument that there wasn't really ever necessarily, other than the Civil War, I guess, which wound up, we all, a couple decades later, we all know how that wound up, just inviting the aristocracy back or inviting the king back, I guess. There wasn't really like a direct confrontation with the aristocracy on the part of the bourgeoisie and the kind of like, forced into being part of this on the political stage, like the proletariat, right? And because of that, and we'll get into maybe why that was here in a second, like a lot of these aristocratic traditions and rent seeking and things like that amongst elites have kind of just carried on into the modern day, which is an interesting argument. And I think, obviously, like if the core argument here is Britain, finish your bourgeois revolution, that is kind of funny. Yeah, we're for that. Finish your bourgeois revolution, Britain, come on. But also like, it's hard to necessarily just put all of the fault for the material forces acting globally on every country and what that means for imperial countries and what it meant for like early imperial countries, as we trace through capitalism's decline. It's hard to just blame that entirely on the on the ruling classes of Britain. But I mean, if you look at the way France developed, there was obviously like a very abrupt end to the aristocracy there. Maybe actually it wasn't that abrupt because there were a few more revolutions that happened there. But there was definitely a direct confrontation that kind of set the tone for how capitalism was going to develop in France. And it's interesting because at the beginning of this, he says something like, the elite in the United Kingdom have just failed to find the solutions that the elite found in Germany and in France. And that's why they're doing so much better. And I was just kind of like, is the elite not just doing a lot better in Germany because they're just always able to have really cheap energy from Russia? Like, I kind of feel like that's a pretty major part of it, right? Like they still have this giant manufacturing sector that Britain just doesn't have access to. But the argument is still there about like, these old traditions weighing heavy on the elite of Britain in a way that is food for thought, if nothing else, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like there's an interesting historical basis to this, and then we sort of actually end up in a not particularly productive place, which is just blaming it on bad or incompetent elites. And if we just had better or more competent elites, then it would be fine. And this is coming back to what I was saying before, like there are things that are somewhat true to this, you could say like there could be better outcomes for the British state and for the United Kingdom in general if there were more competent elites. But that doesn't necessarily solve some of the underlying problems, like the general state of declining productivity, or the kind of like post-imperial era where the UK can no longer have an extractive relationship with other parts of the world, like a sort of potentially interesting historical trajectory being laid out here, like there is an arc to the development of states or to global hegemons to some extent. So the author of this does suggest that like very early on the UK produced what he considers to be, I don't know, the right types of elites, the kind of like, this is in the kind of like, what does he call Cromwellian Republicans, like, or this is almost in the kind of like, the kind of Protestant work ethic was the thing that, along these kind of lines, the existence of of Protestants at the heart of British society created, a new type of productive subject which birthed capitalism, kind of thing. I think a similar line of thought is running through this. The author of this piece suggests that like the UK exported that kind of elite to the United States, and they became the kind of like founding, quote unquote, founding fathers of the United States. And something else happened in the UK to sort of undermine their continued existence. And I think, yeah, you're right to point out that what's being argued is kind of, it's the continued existence of the aristocracy to some extent, or a sort of like slightly poisonous or corrupting influence of this kind of like lingering rentierism. I mean, I feel like it is to some extent true. There's this sort of quip in here that like the British aristocracy is no longer aristocratic and the British bourgeoisie is not productive. And actually what they've both done is trended toward forms of reproduction of their wealth, which are in these kind of like rentier systems, in finance, in property and investment, and not in, quote unquote, like productive investments kind of thing. Now, if we're skirting very close to falling into the trap of like thinking there's good capitalism and bad capitalism and good way to use the money, and like if only they were investing in productive industrial development, then capitalism would be fine. And obviously we recognize that there are other crisis tendencies at work which aren't laid out in this, but I feel like that's the broad argument of the early stages of this essay, at least.
Yeah. And I mean, also, honestly, like you could just make the argument that it's like, given the wave of deindustrialization that happened in like all of the imperial core countries, it's like you could honestly just say that Britain's done very well for itself having this massive financial sector, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's criticized a lot in this, obviously, as being the thing that kind of like covers up how much of a decline Britain is currently in. But like, at least it had that, like, I don't know, again, falling into the trap of good capitalists versus bad capitalists, but like that, it's both a good thing and a bad thing to say that has covered up for a lot of the shortcomings of British deindustrialization. But again, it would be like methodological nationalism to say, how dare Britain go through a wave of deindustrialization when it's like, well, okay, that's literally happened in like every other imperial core country to varying degrees. But yeah, what you were saying kind of got me thinking too, just really quickly about like the timeline of all of this is much more truncated, I think, than we think. And that's just the history of capitalism because, in this, he kind of talks about how at about the turn of the century, there was, a big group of like Fabians and centrists and liberals, right, who all got together to kind of be like, well, what can we do to kind of bring industry back? It's been, investment is going away to places like the United States. It's leaving England. What can we do? And then basically just came to the conclusion, well, there is actually nothing we can do because there's a lot more capital out there. There's a much higher level of technology. And this is just falling into the trap of like, this is just really what this is the rising organic composition of capital. It's like nobody was going to come back into British factories and completely redo them to make them state of the art. It's much better to just go somewhere else with your investment money, and it's a lot cheaper to just set up new factories, right? And then it happened to America. But it is crazy when we think about that timeline of like, okay, well, when you think about when the steam engine, which like catapulted Britain into not just being a leader in the capitalist world, but really creating the first truly capitalist industry in like the textile industry in Britain. that was like widespread adoption began in like the 1830s, and then like 70 years later they're saying they've fallen behind. That really like struck me as like, wow, this stuff happens quick. You know what I mean? It's like probably not a prole's lifetime in that time, but like that's just like one person's lifetime. Britain went from, you know, profiting massively off of the slave trade and, you know, the carbon economy and all this stuff to just, well, I guess we're gonna have to be financiers. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I always have a similar feeling when it comes to like recognizing the development of what we recognize as like norms of capitalist state institutions developing in other Western countries, and think about like it taking well into the 19th century for like Germany and Italy to even cohere into nation states as we would recognize them, and the continued effort throughout the 19th century to like prosecute a slow bourgeois revolution, I suppose, and that process of transitioning to capitalism took a lot longer than one can sometimes imagine it did if you just like have the industrial revolution as like the start, you know, or the French Revolution as the start. But there's a much more protracted and more recent process. To some extent, that's what's been hinted at in this essay, right? You know, like if there is a natural arc to these things, then, you know, Britain was just first, and then it produced a certain type of elite, and then other countries went through a process of elite production which allowed for those elites to prosecute the transition to capitalism, whether it's Bismarck or, I mean, he talks about Lenin and Mao and as figures of elite, sort of elite, competent elite production in states. I don't think he's necessarily suggesting that Lenin and Mao instituted capitalism in their respective countries, although, you know, we would.
I was, when I got to that point, I was like, is this guy an ultra leftist? Yeah. I was like, I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, that recognition of like, they knew it at the beginning of the 20th century, they knew, and then came to the conclusion there was just nothing to be done. And we have to suffer, well, you know, the United Kingdom has to suffer this gradual decline. And in some respects, that explains their behavior, right? It's like capture wealth, funnel it upwards, and find ways of covering over the detrimental effects that has on the rest of the society in the UK. I mean, that would be probably the logic that I would agree with the most, is as to what is actually happening, right? It's just like the hoarding and funneling upwards of wealth. I mean, this essay opens with this idea, like the decline of England, Britain, the decline of Britain becomes apparent where at points of crisis, and then the elites are able to sort of like seemingly like productive or wealth creating strong financial industries that Britain has to kind of like revivify some kind of seeming growth in the economy to make the economy look healthy. And I think that's where we're at right now. And it's, in some respects, it's throughout the industrialized Western world now, like seeming. I mean, I think you would make the argument that the United States potentially in a similar situation. Maybe it's like internal production of fossil fuels can sort of like cover some of that like decline, you know. But like, I don't know. Yeah, it does. It feels evidently true that by a whole slew of metrics, the well-being of the people that live in Britain is getting worse, except that we can somehow still say line go up, even if it's like by a fractions of a percentage of growth. You know, we can still, or the elites can still convince themselves that growth is possible. They just need to pursue growth, and that will sort of like cover for all the shortcomings of everything else, kind of thing.
Yeah, and they're getting better and better at fudging what growth actually means, right? Because it's definitely not return on investment. Instead, it's just like, you know, it's like, yeah, I don't know. It really does feel like we've been living through the kind of like death throes of finance capital for a little while now. You know, I'm not going to say like too long, but it's like, it does feel like this is the next thing after neoliberalism, where it's like, now it's no longer those respectable neoliberals who made their money off of like, you know, just doing fire sales for every government agency, every welfare agency, everything like that. It's like, now it's like capitalists who if you can even call them that, it's like people who are promoting Kalshi and fucking like Bitcoin still, you know, it's like, it's been a headline in The Guardian for like 3 weeks that Nigel Farage, why did he receive 5 million pounds from this Bitcoin guy? And it's like, yeah, why could he have just been given that money? It's like, you know, it's like, I don't know. You would never see a Chicago boy like ending a White House press conference early so everybody in the administration can hit the fucking under on the predictions market, right? It's like, yeah, all of that is basically just to say that I think you're absolutely right. I think that there is a lot of England bashing that goes along, mainly because it's funny, but and the funniness comes from the fact that England still has these old institutions that a lot of the world looks at and is just like, really? Like the King's Speech? What? You know what I mean? But like, to pretend that this decline isn't, it's not the same thing that's happening everywhere in the imperial core, including China, is like absurd, right? It's like, you know, Britain is dead, ... And so is like everywhere else. If you want to make that same comparison, it's just the fact that America still has these, you know, huge fossil fuel reserves where it can keep pumping out oil, and it still has enough manufacturing to make it look like the line's going up, and it's, you know, a global hub for tech. Whereas places like Britain, places like France, increasingly in the last few years, places like Germany are kind of running out of options for ways to do that. And, you know, the same thing's happening with China. Like we spoke about this when we did the episode on the heat wave stuff, right? Like China has its own issues, not the least of which are a mass demographic collapse coming in the next few decades. So, you know, it's the England bashing stuff is funny, but it's also like, you know, it's happening everywhere, man. Like,
and I think there is some value perhaps in thinking about this in terms of like the development cycle of a capitalist state to some extent, because it's interesting that you bring up China, because I can imagine some people being China is the counterpoint to this. You know, there's this sort of like, I don't know how mythic or how true it is that like this idea that like China has good elites somehow, or is better managed, or is
they have good billionaires.
Functions. And like, you know, maybe this is true and maybe this is not, but like it's not worth overlooking the, as you say, like the one that China is subject to similar trends, you know, like its growth rates are declining and it's sort of struck by these other crisis tendencies that it's subjected to. And then also, you know, it's further down the way. Also, it's like a legitimate global hegemon in the sense of the amount of territory that it controls and how central it made it to itself to the sort of global production machine of like, yeah, transnational capitalism. And then it's just sort of further down the road of development into capitalism, right? Like, you know, it's just gone through this process sooner, and you know, its day will come, perhaps. But
yeah, well, I mean,
crisis tendencies revealing themselves.
Yeah, well, of course, and it's like, this should be like day one stuff for a lot of socialists, where it's like capitalism is a global system that only respects international boundaries insofar as those boundaries can protect individual capitalists or consortiums, right? It's like, whatever, like the fact that this stuff wouldn't happen to China. But what you say is a very good, this idea about their elites being better, you know, there's some truth to that. They're certainly coming across as infinitely more responsible at the moment. If you want to talk about good capitalists versus bad capitalists, they're much more responsible, not in the sense of looking after proles. Obviously, that's not what I mean, but like
responsive,
protecting and just wanting to make money. It's like the Chinese Protestant work ethic. You know what I mean? It's like now they're, you know, hey man, keep the oil coming and we'll keep producing shit. Although obviously we spoke about the kind of tendencies in China to kind of their own interests in reshoring to kind of like, you know, protect their productive capacity. But like, you know, I touched on this a little bit earlier. It's like in capitalism, productive capacity is always moving. It's always shifting across the world. You know, it's like, okay, the textile industry was in Britain at first, and then it moved to America. And then when those factories got outdated, investment shifts to places where wages are lower and they're able to set up, you know, more automated factories, places like Bangladesh now, Southeast Asia, right? Like, and then Nigeria, like it's always constantly moving. And so there is definitely something to the idea of like when this terminal decline really starts to kick in, who is the one that is left with the productive capacity at that moment? That's an interesting question, right? I mean, the main part of this essay is like, it's certainly not going to be Britain, right? Doesn't seem like it's going to be Europe. where only to a certain extent will it be America. It might just be China, right? Like, but what that actually winds up meaning when all of this stuff runs on fossil fuels, like, you know, it's a hard thing to say. But yeah, methodological nationalism. I know that we're reading an essay called Britain is Dead and we're just focusing on Britain, but it's like, you know, you got to avoid it, I guess.
Did you find the sort of the family genealogy of the Bushes versus the Camerons like edifying anyway? This idea that like David Cameron comes from a family of financiers managing, I don't know, HSBC Bank and whatever, and the Bushes were like, the Bushes were like good, productive capitalists, you know.
Seeing someone even give a remote amount of like clout to the Bushes kind of made me a little bit like, oh my god. You mean the guy that killed Kennedy? Just kidding.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I mean that part was funny. Like, oh god, here we go. I mean, I don't know. It was edifying in the sense that it's like, I guess these are the people that are given the keys to the castle, right? In England's case, I guess, literally. But like, you know, I don't know. Was it interesting? Does that actually change the dynamics of capitalism? Probably not. It's like an interesting idea. I love the idea that England, through like religious and cultural norms, just kind of like exported all of its good capitalists to America. I do think that's a very funny idea. It comes across as very absurd, but I see what he's kind of saying. It's like, but yeah, the David Cameron stuff. More than I was just reminded that David Cameron exists, and I was like, oh god, I didn't realize he was that much of a nepo baby. Although I should have probably assumed, you know, whatever. I'm interested. I guess maybe we can talk a little bit about like when we talk about these elites and their inability to kind of work through these crises. I think we've already kind of touched on the fact that it's like, well, there might not be any type of technocrat, no matter what courses they took, that will be able to kind of like weather this global decline. Let me just see if I can quickly find the quote. Oh yeah, I like this. So he interviews a bunch of different people from a bunch of different backgrounds about what they think is happening with this decline and what they think how it relates to the elites. And he interviews a guy named James Schneider, who was once the director of strategic communications for Jeremy Corbyn when he was Labour leader. And he says he believed that the British state faces exogenous forces outside of its control. Because of this, educational reforms cannot make it more effective. Quote, if you wanted a better COVID response, how many people study classics or not might have only changed outcomes by 2 or 3%. It's like, well, yeah, like I'm glad the Corbyn guy was kind of able to understand what's going on, because he interviews some like barons or whatever who were like, global decline, not from my estate. I don't know what you're talking about. People just need to read, you know, fucking like Ovid or something.
Finance capital good.
yeah, I say it's done all right by me.
We should be really impressed that like Britain is a world leader in managing other people's finances, you know?
Yeah,
managing the productive surpluses of you know, oil producing Middle East states, or
yeah, exactly.
I don't know, whatever the hell like consultancy even is, but you know.
Yeah, I know. When he talks about like consultants being hired to talk about, I've been in workplaces before where it's like, when I was doing union stuff, where consultants would come through to basically see how many people they could fire. And it is exactly what he's talking about like, you literally get consultants in to be like, how should we manage our consultancy problem here? And it's just like, oh my God, like literally the consultants came into the place I used to work and they were like, fire all of the janitors. It was like, wow, that was worth the like fucking 6 figures we gave them. It's like, oh my God. Yeah, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. But anyway, my point just kind of being like, to tie it back to the election, you know, we saw all of this. I don't think we've even said the word reform, which is kind of funny. Like we saw this huge surge in report for reform, which is kind of mystifying what's going on a little bit, I guess, because reform, even though they're still the most popular party in the country in terms of like polling support, whatever that means at the moment, like they've been on a downward trend basically ever since they hit that peak after the last election. And I think that very clearly points to the fact that it's like, even if, well, I mean, this is obvious what I'm about to say, but like, even if reform were to get in charge, it's very clear that they also wouldn't know what to do. I mean, they would just be like, MAGA without the productive capacity or wealth to actually make any changes to like the global order, right? So it's just like which is all to just say they'd just be rats on a sinking ship, right? They would just be make crypto, regulation go away and just do a bunch of different things where a bunch of different capitalists can just scam their way into making a bunch of money and then fuck everything up, and they also wouldn't be able to solve it, right? So it's an interesting one. It's like, where do capitalist parties go from here? And the next few elections are going to be interesting because it's almost like you don't want to really be in charge, right? It's like if you can promise your constituency certain things, get them, and not be in power, you're going to be much more popular than if you just had to pretend like you have even the first idea of how to fix things, right? Like,
yeah, that reminds me there are points in this where this sort of like the line of argument seems to stray closer to more revolutionary conclusions, I suppose, particularly when we're talking about this group of elite at the beginning of the 19th century that are aware of this like national decline that Britain is suffering and want to try and come together to find a solution. And I think one of the realizations either that they have or that this essay takes as a natural conclusion of that is to say that what would be necessary to solve these problems might be just shake up the system too much, like to what extent would you have to disempower, disenfranchise, decenter these financial elites, I suppose? Like what would it take to move the British economy away from simply propping up London as a financial centre and trying to hide behind that and pretend that that's representative of having a functioning economy. And if you were to try and do that, how revolutionary a conclusion would you have to take? Like how destabilizing of the capitalist system in Britain would it be? I guess the question I'm asking, or people, the author of this is asking, or should be asking, or people worried about this question should be asking, is like, how radical, verging on revolutionary would the solutions have to be to like solve this problem? And I guess I ask that because, like, I dress myself up as a revolutionary sometimes, but like also like there is a necessity to try and find solutions to solve the problem of the problems of British politics, even under capitalism, that socialists have to try and wrestle with and grapple with, kind of thing. And whether there's a sort of trajectory through reformist proposals to revolutionary outcomes, I don't really know. But like some of these questions, at least, like felt pertinent to the thrust of this, or sort of some of the gaps in this argument seem to like lay along this fault line of reform and revolution. And are you actually demanding such serious things at the system that the system would break apart if you were actually to solve it? If this essay got what it wanted and had the right elites come into power, I don't know, how radical would the solutions have to be?
Yeah. Probably like food security. You know what I mean? Because it's like to institute anything that would even begin to challenge these global, like, well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's not possible. Like, I hate to say it. It's like, it's kind of just not possible. It's like, how do you reverse the train of investment that follows productive capacity? Class war? Like, because I don't know. The only reason I said food security is because it's like, all of these systems are very obviously tied together. And if what you're really trying to accomplish is how can we create like a secure, high living standard for everybody that lives in the country, which is ostensibly the mandate everybody's given, like, it probably begins with not just massively importing loads of soybeans, right? Or exporting loads of, beans, or like, I think this question's just been really hanging very heavily on my head since moving to Ireland, because it's just like fucking like something like between 60 and 70% of the total landmass out here is just for fucking livestock. It's unbelievable. Even like the massive not massive, the like national parks out here. Like I went and did Carrauntoohil the other day, which is like the highest peak out here. And it's like they're fucking sheep grazing on the mountain in the park. It's like, get these fucking sheep out of here. It's like, technically, like, landowners own all of that land. It's like, give me a fucking break. Let the trees grow. What are you doing? Like, anyway, and I'm complaining about that. But like, that's probably the first thing that you need to consider to actually question the global logic of capitalism is like, how can you fundamentally at a base level, like, I don't know, decouple, I guess, like from this global supply chain? And it probably begins with food. And that's a massive question. And the reason I jokingly, said class war is because really, you're going to try and just like go up against the farmers? Come on now. They're like the biggest petty bourgeois class out there. Like out here, no way. There's like no way they'd let you do that. So that could be an absurd conclusion. It's just something that came off the top of my head. But it's like, if what you're actually doing is actually attempting to use these levers of power to question the global logic of capital, it probably begins with something like that, you know?
I mean, you highlight an interesting problem with that. I mean, you keep saying, using the phrase methodological nationalism, right? And like, I guess it's important to point out like what we're talking about here is the national success or failure of one country versus the national success or failure of another. And elites, if they were interested in securing the longevity of a particular polity or geographical region in the form of a state, should definitely focus on things like that, you know, like food security and things that the elites that are produced in the UK right now have no interest in. Maybe this is an interesting point, actually, is a sense like the UK's proximity to global finance maybe leaves it even more exposed to like sort of like jettisoning like basic national interest in the interest of like ostensibly being open to financial markets. But like it's another example of how those elites are undermining the actual national interest of Britain, because like that's not their interest at all, you know, like that's not what they're trying to achieve. But you know, some kind of international or regional internationalism is really what we're after. And
yeah, no, yeah, right. Yeah, it's a tricky question because it's like, how do you combine attempting to challenge the global logic of capitalism while at the same time having like an internationalist approach to class? I guess you just do that, which is easy. You have an international global movement, which works out perfectly, and there's no disruption to any service or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one. I bet you questions like that start coming up on the left much more often. You know what I mean? Like from here on out about, wait a minute, why are we importing all of these soybeans? Why is everybody eating some? I mean, I fucking hope so. Like, I don't know, whatever. Maybe the last thing I just kind of wanted to touch on is to kind of go back to talking about reform and MAGA and all this and the kind of like global far right at the moment, because this piece raises, as we've kind of spoken about, some really interesting questions of like who is going to have the technocratic like quick fix. And, you know, you're getting these conservative challengers all over the world, right, who are attempting to be the strong party that'll just do what needs to be done. And it's a really interesting one because it seems like if you can compare these parties all over the world, which I'll get to in a second why I think you probably can't, but if you can, the probably two things, to my mind at least, that kind of drive them together is a willingness to do, quote unquote, what needs to be done in terms of like exporting and deporting the kind of like swelling ranks of the reserve army of the proletariat from a bunch of these different imperial core countries. Obviously, that's reform's like main thing. This takes the form ideologically of just like virulent racism. Obviously, America, same thing. But then the other thing is, again, it's just, what are they actually offering their real base, the capitalist base that are giving material support to these parties? It's just get rich quick schemes. You know what I mean? It's this really interesting dichotomy of like, well, we'll offer you this real material support, but you should probably be investing in predictions markets and shit like that. I keep bringing up predictions markets because it's the NBA playoffs right now. This is just driving me fucking nuts, all of this shit people gamble on. But like, it's interesting. And then just to kind of say like, another reason why this right wing like turn, I suppose, is doomed to fail, other than the obvious, they're not going to be able to challenge capital in a meaningful way, and they're not going to be able to reverse any of these declines anywhere, obviously, except maybe momentarily by like, you know, getting rid of a bunch of proles and immigrants, I guess. Well, yeah, immigrant proles. Is just because I don't think any of these parties like really like there are so many differences in I've noticed this really since moving to Ireland in terms of the much more like European outlook here. Like the different right-wing parties all over Europe are so different. Like the one thing that ties them together obviously is like, you know, racism and shit. And then just like the get rich quick schemes, but like so many of them are like pro-America, kind of like the current incarnation of reform, but then other of them are like pro-Europe, and then other ones are pro-Russia because that's where they get all their cheap fuel from. And it's like Giorgia Meloni coming out a couple of weeks ago and like withdrawing from like a defense pact with Israel. It's like some of them are pro-China, some of them are pro-Europe, some of them are a lot of them obviously out here are pro-America, but it's like, yeah, that just speaks to a really interesting, you know, like where everybody's bread's buttered. It's like the far right doesn't have one solid foreign policy. And it's really in like, there are just so many different needs that are qualitatively different amongst the capitalist classes at the moment that like those industries that would do well to have fewer proles running around and drive, and they're able to drive down wages, like their foreign policies can be radically different, even if they have that in common. So it's like, and then obviously there's like all this stuff in reform about how they can barely even agree on Farage being a leader. And it's just like, yeah, it's crazy. It's like, I don't expect anything good to happen, but I also don't expect there to just be like fascism 2.0 because like there's just no internal cohesion amongst these for now, at least. Right. I mean, maybe they all just get together and do a like big pro-European fascist thing. Maybe that would happen. But again, it's like energy comes from Russia. You import goods from China because they're really cheap. America gives you your weapons. It's like, well, it's a global system. What are you going to do? You know?
Yeah. Just about to come back to that. Like that's at the end of the day, it's impossible. We've covered this before. You know, it's impossible to withdraw, or it's impossible to fundamentally challenge the integrated nature of global production, I guess. But yeah, that confronted with the politics of multipolar world and different competing hegemons and who we're just going to align ourselves with. But it's an interesting way to think about these emergent right-wing projects in like periphery countries, of which the United Kingdom is definitely one. You know, like how and with whom are they going to ally themselves? Which, like, you know, hegemon do they recognize? And certainly feels like reform is very pro United States. I mean, I think in Britain there really isn't any other way for you to go in terms of tying yourself to a emergent global or regional superpower, I guess. But interesting that perspective from Ireland, where it's like it can splinter in different directions, I guess.
Yeah. I this is probably just because I'm out of the loop, but I was really surprised in the past kind of like couple months seeing the kind of like pro-European, not that any of these people were like Brexiteers, obviously, but like the pro-European turn of Starmer's government and kind of being like, maybe we can kind of just like rejoin the EU, but not really say we're rejoining the EU. And then obviously everything that happened or is continuing to happen with the war in Iran, where it's like, oh, this is clearly designed just to like cut Europe off from all of its energy supplies and massively drive up the price of oil, which America benefits from and Europe does not benefit from. Yeah, again, we spoke about this when it happened. We were just like, it was kind of surprising that Starmer didn't just like immediately kowtow to Trump and be like, would you like to use our nuclear submarines, sir? Like maybe if I was more in the loop, I wouldn't have been as surprised by that. But it's interesting. All that's to kind of say, like, if that continues until the next election, it's like it's going to be such whiplash where it's like, say, like a right-wing government gets in and now they're like, no, wait, no, now we're reversing course even harder. And now not only are we anti-Europe or pro-America, it's like, yeah, it's the elites need to get that together, who they need to support there.
I had somebody hypothesizing recently because I think the start of the Iran war happened in very close proximity to Labour losing that by-election in Manchester recently. And somebody was hypothesizing that like the loss of that by-election almost led Starmer to have to not follow Trump for whatever reason. I don't know how true or not that is, but like that we came that close to like, following the US dutifully as we always do. But
Yeah, you want to know who really pulls the strings? It's hipsters in Manchester, Dan. They're behind everything. Yeah, what are you going to do? It'll be interesting. Interesting. I mean, again, when I kind of suggested this one, and I was like, it's a good case study in terms of like where a country at the current level of deindustrialization and financialization as the UK is. What a good case study would be for like, what that country does in the current moment. It's like, yeah, all of this stuff in terms of like, I don't know, who the ruling elite of the United Kingdom want to kind of like tie their lot to. It's a very interesting question. And it'll be interesting to see what Europe winds up doing, right? Like, will Europe just literally wind up being like the low countries, France and Germany at a certain point? Like, we'll see. We'll see.
So the auxiliary statements proposition is a massive wealth tax to fund rewilding the UK and growing beans everywhere. Is that
yeah, food foraging is our food forests as far as the eye can see.
And then we get nuked by everyone. Great.
Yeah, you cannot. That's the one thing everyone can agree on that you can't do. What are you going to do? I mean, also, we obviously, like, we haven't even mentioned what the left's response needs to be to all of this, which is like, yeah, presumably having some sort of backbone and trying to challenge these things, the global, system of capitalism in any meaningful way. But like, for whatever reason, the material support is not quite there yet for your party. So we'll see. Corbyn just needs to retire, man. It'll solve it all. He just needs to retire. It's like, why do you want to continue to like to do this? Whatever. What are you gonna do? Well. All right. Well, we did it. We're back.
Yeah, this is fun. Back on the podcasting horse, as they say.
Well, on the podcasting circuit. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan. I enjoyed that a lot. The next time we'll read one about America being dead, just to kind of make it a bit more fair. All right. See you later. Hey everybody, Jack here. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. The song that you heard on this episode is Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. You can go ahead and check this song out much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. If you want to go ahead and get in touch with us, chat shit, tell us that we're wrong, whatever you want to do, you can go ahead and do that at auxiliarystatements@gmail.com. You can just send us a message there, or you can get in touch with us on Twitter, on Discord, on Instagram. You're a smart person. You can find these places. We got a YouTube. We post stuff there as well. Sometimes we stream. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time.